Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us again this week. I say it every week, but we have a very important show in store, so get your coffee and your pen and your paper, because this week we are meeting with Melanie McNeil, State Long Term Care Ombudsman for Georgia, and Karen Boyles, who is the local Atlanta Ombudsman in the state of Georgia as well. So for those of you listening from other states, because I do know we're in Phoenix and New Orleans and other states, very important information that will pertain no matter where you live about your loved one, or if you're faced with placing a loved one in a personal care home, assisted living facility, or long-term care facility. Melanie, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And Karen, you too.
Thank you.
I really look forward to this show, especially in light of some of the recent news we've seen on the television, and we really need to educate folks about what their rights are in these facilities and what all your program is about. So thank you so much. Melanie, can we talk about how you got involved with the Ombudsman program?
Sure. I worked with the Georgia Council on Aging, also advocates for older adults in the state of Georgia for about 10 years. It left and then came back when our longtime state long-term care ombudsman, Becky Kurtz, became the national director of long-term care ombudsman programs in Washington, D.C.
Did she? Wow, right from Georgia.
Right from Georgia. So Becky is leading the ombudsman programs across the country for all the states. We're very proud of Becky, and I was happy to be able to step into her role. Big shoes to fill, but again, it's advocacy for residents of long-term care facilities. So it seemed a natural fit.
Yeah, sounds like it. And how long have you been the state long-term care ombudsman?
I've been the state ombudsman about 2 years.
Okay, great.
And Karen has actually been a local ombudsman for quite a long time.
Karen, let's talk about you. How did you get into the Ombudsman program?
Well, I was with Project Open Hand as the executive director for a while, and then I came to, there was an opening for the long-term care ombudsman program on the local basis. So we're employees of the Atlanta Legal Aid Society. So I've been the local coordinator for 17 years now.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure you're a big asset here in Georgia.
Well, thank you.
So do you need, what kind of a background do you need? Is there a need for more ombudsmen? I see signs sometimes up in Ackworth on 41. Is there a need for more ombudsmen in Georgia?
Certainly we can use volunteers, and we try to recruit volunteers to assist the program. There are so many facilities, so many residents. It's difficult for the staff to get to every facility. The requirement is that our ombudsman visit skilled nursing facilities and personal care homes at least quarterly. But as you might imagine, things happen in facilities every day. So to have a volunteer who's going into the facility maybe weekly or at least monthly, building relationships with those residents so that they feel they can trust that person and share whatever the situation might be. We absolutely, across the state, could use more volunteers to help us be advocates for those long-term care residents.
Do you need a legal background, or what do you look for in an ombudsman?
Really, we were talking about this on the way over. We need someone who really believes in the rights of individuals and will advocate on behalf of the individual. We do have volunteers that have a legal background, but that's not really a requirement. I think a lot of our volunteers are people who have a social work background or interest in social services, but many of our volunteers are, folks who have retired from whatever their position might have been. Could have been a teacher, could have been even someone who stayed home, was a mom who raised children and now has a passion to do something more, and so wants to spend time with individuals in facilities.
That's great. So I do reach out to all of you in our communities, again, whether you're in Atlanta, Georgia, New Orleans, Phoenix. Seniors, we're here because of them, and we owe it back to make sure that they are advocated for throughout their entire life. And so I'm passionate about caring for my elders and seniors, and I've worked in hospice for a long time, as anyone who knows listening to this show, and there's just not enough advocacy going around. So anywhere you are, if someone is interested, how should they, who should they contact?
Regardless of where you are, if you're in Georgia or in one of the other states, if you Google, and people do Google these days, Long Term Care Ombudsman for your state, chances are your state ombudsman has a website, and you can then make a connection from there. So for Georgia, it's www.georgiaombudsman.org. When you go to our website, you can see the different local ombudsman programs and the counties they serve. So if you're in Trutland County, for instance, you can find the ombudsman program that serves your area. You could certainly call them and let them know you'd like to volunteer. If you're up in Hall County, if you're in Cherokee County, you find the county on our website, and then you'll know which program to call. The numbers are listed.
Wonderful.
Just call the local programs, and they would be happy to talk with you about their need for volunteers and how you might volunteer.
Great. And so we kind of went right into that instead of talking about the residents, and we'll come back to this because I do want to talk about training and required number of hours, and if you are interested in all of that, because I'm also an advocate to get volunteers to help as much as possible. I don't think we have enough people giving back to the community. So thank you for letting me take that little path. But back to the Ombudsman program. So Karen and Melanie, you are Ombudsman for long-term care specifically. What does that entail?
For a local ombudsman, that entails visiting and advocating for people who live in nursing homes and personal care homes. And our mantra, so to speak, is what does the resident want? And we try to advocate for the person to resolve issues that they might have in those facilities.
And when you say nursing home and personal care home, that includes assisted living facilities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There's all sorts of different designations now on personal care homes, assisted living, but the people who live there are all people who need some sort of assistance.
Okay, so what are some typical, and there's never typical, I do know that, but, and I'll throw that out to either one of you, Karen or Melanie, whoever wants to answer. What are some typical, I don't want to say complaints because I don't want to put a negative spin on it, but issues that you help residents of long-term care facilities with on a regular basis?
Well, we just helped a lady last week whose sister was in a nursing home, and there was a lack of communication between the family and the facility. And we were able to come in and help the family do a care plan session, which is a session where the facility and the family talk about the care and what the resident needs and wants. And there just seemed to be a breakdown in communication, so we were able to come in and help resolve that situation. The administrator at the facility agreed in the end to have the resident go to the hospital to do some tests with the assurance that when the tests were completed and the diagnosis was given, that the resident could go back to the facility in her same room, in her same bed. Sounds like it's simple, but sometimes things just get off kilter.
And what's typical there, because this is Better Living, and this is a show dedicated to educating and informing everyone about all aspects of senior living. And so I don't think people know enough the struggles that some of these facilities go through and why that might even be an issue. Seems logical to me. You know what? I'm just going for some tests. I'll be back.
Well, I think the emotions get in the way a lot of times, because it's emotionally wrenching to have to make the decision that my sister really does need this care, but I wish I could do it myself and keep her at home. But I've got my own family to take care of. So it really, I think a lot of times it's the emotion just gets in the way, and then we can come in as kind of an outside person and say, well, have you tried this, to the family or to the administrator? Well, what what about your director of nursing? What can she do to help the family not be so anxious? So I think that provides a valuable service to folks, and I don't think you can put a dollar amount
You
on
can't.
that.
And I think I've talked about this story before, but no one can take care of your loved one as well as you can. And then if they do, you kind of resent them. So, these facilities are sort of between a rock and a hard place. But I had a little lady who actually needed hospice. This was up in Boston. And her family really was in denial. And I had met with them. And I was new in the business and young and very nervous to meet with this family because there were 6 of them, siblings, and one was a lawyer, and one was an accountant, and one was a teacher, and one was a politician. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get through this meeting. And it came down to the fact that she had a thyroid condition, and they always kept 6 blankets on her because she was always cold. And the facility just wasn't putting enough blankets on Mom. And they ended up electing hospice because of exactly what you said. It's just another set of eyes and ears. It's another company that can advocate for your loved one. And we put right in the care plan. I walked down to the nurse's station and said, you know what's wrong? They just want to make sure this patient has 6 blankets on her at all time. And I happen to have a thyroid condition, so I know you're freezing. When no one else is, you really are cold, and you feel it to your core. So we put in the care plan, must have 6, or maybe we put 3 blankets on at all times. Changed the whole scenario. Everybody was happy. Just that little bitty thing, because now you're being consistent with what Mom had at home. So, and sometimes it's just necessary to have that, really, you're mediators in a lot of cases.
For the most part, but in the end, we are the advocate for the resident. What does the resident want? And sometimes it conflicts with what the family wants, or it conflicts with what the facility says. An example would be a diabetic resident who wants to have her ice cream or cake on birthday day, and nobody wants her to have it, but ultimately she has the right to make that decision on what that's going to do to her. And sometimes that's very hard. It's hard for me to have to advocate for somebody where it's going to compromise their health. But that's the hard part.
And you know what? We live compromising our health every day.
Yeah.
Think about the freedom and the choice and the power we all have driving in our car, going to work every day, picking up food we know isn't good for us. Last night I had way too many pieces of lasagna. But we do it even though we know it's not good for our health, and how it could make, I can't even imagine how that would make me feel to say I want a birthday cake on my birthday and have to have someone fight for me. But we have our families have our best interest in hand too. So sometimes it's just making that mediation happen between you and the family member as well.
And if I might add, some of the time what the ombudsman is helping the person who doesn't have any family at all. So there isn't anyone to help advocate on their behalf that they want the 6 blankets or they want the cake. And so then it's the ombudsman who is there asking the resident, what is it that you want? How can I help you? And then advocating on their behalf with the facility to get what it is that they want. I mean, I think it must be very hard for people who have really no one. No one comes to visit. They're the people that they live with are their neighbors, but it's just not exactly the same, I don't think, for, you live in a facility where the person who lives in the room next to you has lots of family who comes to visit all the time, and there you are with no one except the ombudsman who comes and wants to spend time with you. Or there again, getting back to the visitors.
I know, I'm getting ready to say I need some more volunteers, folks. And then they give back. And in hospice we recruit lots of volunteers, and we used to have people just come and sit and watch the baseball games.
Exactly.
And just that little game, they would look forward to watching the game and talking about, oh, he's cold and he's in a slump and he's doing well, or and what a joy it is to give back. So folks, please, if you have extra time, if you're retired, if you're looking for something fulfilling, sometimes the most fulfilling things aren't things you get paid for. And there are so many people in facilities that have no family left that would love just to have you come and watch a baseball game, or Dancing with the Stars.
Exactly.
Or Wheel of Fortune. That was always a favorite of my grandmother.
I had a resident who had exactly what you're talking about. He had nobody. I went into his room one day. He was a new resident, and what he had on his wall was his Purple Heart from World War II. And that touched my heart, because he had no family. I think everybody else had died in his family. So what we did, we sent in. We happened to have at the time some men volunteers, and men need to come and volunteer because the men in the nursing homes are in the minority. We brought a male volunteer in to talk with him, just so he'd have a buddy to talk to, and that worked out. It meant the world, I think, to both of them. So it really is a rewarding volunteer opportunity.
It really is. I do want to get back, Melanie, to you, because something you said triggered me. For folks that really don't have anyone, and you're advocating for them, and I have worked in hospice for a long time up in Boston and down here in Georgia too, and throughout the Midwest and in Phoenix. What happens, I really want to educate folks, what happens when people end up in a facility and they have no one to advocate for them, and perhaps they have dementia, so they can't make decisions for themselves, and say they need hospice? Walk folks through how the Ombudsman program helps, and why maybe it's best to get in there as early as possible to help advocate for them.
Sure. Well,
that's a tricky one.
It is really a tricky one. As Ombudsman, we will advocate on behalf of someone unless a court has taken away your right to choose. So some of the time it is the Ombudsman working with the facility to figure out, what can we do? What does this resident understand? Are they able to make some decisions for themselves? If the Ombudsman in working with the resident feels like the resident could be referred to the Elderly Legal Assistance Program, maybe to put in place a power of attorney, or to make some designations, right, or to go ahead and make those choices, even the Healthcare Advance Directive, oftentimes people are clear enough that they can do some of those things even if they're confused some of the time, but they're clear enough that they can fill out a document to say, if I get to this place, I do want hospice, or if I get to this place, I don't want whatever it is that they don't want.
And is that part of the Ombudsman program?
We would make referrals to folks like the Elderly Legal Assistance Program. Yes, okay. We would do things like that. Some of the time, as you were describing, Ombudsmen are really just trying to do the problem solving. So it may not require, depending, it may not require that we get an attorney involved, but some of the time it would. And,
again, we talk about educating and informing so that folks have the power to choose what's right for them because they are informed. And so, I've been in this business for over a decade or more, and I have seen that situation, and it sometimes can be frustrating because you can get in there and help, and all hands are tied because you can't quite take it to the next level in time. And so while we're here informing and educating, I personally have a passion about folks having advance directives in place and communicating with their family members as you enter into one of these facilities, or the day you get the dementia diagnosis. Talk to your loved one, talk to your families, get it down so that people know what you need and it's there. Because I have seen, and this isn't about the Ombudsman program, but just to advocate for folks, I have seen people in facilities who have no one who could benefit from, I'm talking hospice because that's my world, but I'm sure there's other situations as well, but they can't because legally no one is there to speak on their behalf, and so they go without. And so while we're educating and informing, please, and we're on this topic, have those conversations with your loved ones. And sometimes, would you all help to have those conversations as well, or you would send that to an elder care attorney?
Well, Ombudsman would talk with the residents, and if the resident wants a family involved, or if the family brings the issue and the resident is willing, Ombudsman would try and facilitate that conversation.
It's
great. Really what the resident wants. So it would get back there again to, if the resident would like the ombudsman to help facilitate that, we absolutely would try and help that conversation.
And again, it's the resident's desires and wants and rights. And sometimes that's hard for family members too. And we talk about that. Your spouse or your daughter or your son might not be the best person to put down as your healthcare power of attorney because maybe they can't make the decisions that you want made for you. And so that's something else that they have to consider as well. But we do have to get back to the Ombudsman program. So as we're talking about patients' rights, what are some typical rights? Because I read in your booklet, a lot of times people don't know what their rights are. So what are some rights that you want to get out there and educate folks about?
Just because you change your residence from your home to a personal care home, an assisted living community, a skilled nursing facility, you don't leave your constitutional rights at the door. So you have the right to make choices about your treatment. You have the right to say, I don't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and take a shower. I want to get up at 10 o'clock in the morning.
That's a big one.
Right.
Because that's the routine, and that makes it easier on the staff because they get into their routine. And we're not knocking facilities because they have a tough job too, but you have a right. You don't have to get up at 6 in the morning, and that's true. People don't know that.
And so sometimes people don't realize that they can even say to the facility, I would like you to do something different. They come in and just say, okay, we're going to give you your bath at 8 o'clock. And people don't realize they could say, you know what, would you please do my neighbor or ask my neighbor what they want, because I don't want to be the one who takes my bath at 8 o'clock. People don't sometimes residents don't realize that they can voice their preferences. And so then some of the time that's when the ombudsman gets called, because the resident finally gets to that place where they are frustrated and they want to complain, and it's a communication issue like Karen was describing. Some of the time it's really voicing what it is that you want, and sometimes the ombudsman has to facilitate that conversation with the facility too, but it's negotiating so that people get what it is that they want.
And that's so important because I have seen that myself as well. I have so many more questions, but we're already at the time to close. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back, and we'll revisit some of the resident rights that folks just don't know that they have so that we can help them advocate for themselves as well. So stay with us because we have lots more information to share with you in the next half hour. Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey. Welcome back to Better Living. I'm Jeannie Pete, and again, I'm here today with the Georgia State Ombudsman, Melanie McNeil, and the local Atlanta Ombudsman, Karen Boyles. And we're talking about residents' rights if you are in a long-term care facility, personal care home, assisted living facility, or skilled nursing home, or if you have a loved one that is either in one of these facilities or you're considering having to place them. Great information to be shared in the next half hour about what the rights of your loved one are and the advocacy program of the Ombudsman Long-Term Care Program, Resident Advocates. Boy, that was a mouthful. So prior to the break, we were talking about residents' rights, specifically as it pertained to their own choice to get up in the morning and what time they need to get up. Can we revisit that for a moment as we bring folks back to the show?
Sure. What we were saying is whether you're a resident in a long-term care facility or you live in your own home, you have certain rights. You have the right to medical treatment or to refuse medical treatment. You have the right to decide what you're going to do in your daily routine. And so if you're a skilled nursing facility resident or a personal care home resident, you have the right to say what time you want to get up, what time you want to go to bed, who you have visit you. You have the right to have visitors. It's not up to the facility to say who can visit or who cannot visit. You have the right to phone access and to have the ability to have a conversation privately with over the phone with the ombudsman or anybody else. You do have the right to do that. Karen, maybe you want to mention a couple of others?
Well, before we go on to some more, because I have questions about each and every one, just to go back to, you have a right to your own routine. Because, I have two sons. One gets up every morning at 7 a.m. and the other one I'm trying to wake up at 9:30. And so as I'm thinking, if I'm placing someone in a facility or face to place a loved one in a facility, I'm going to be concerned that they're able to live out their routine. And folks just don't know. So I do want to harp on that when you get in there, some of the questions that you need to ask, and just like everything else, the more you get out up front, the better decision you're going to make. And so I want to arm folks with the right questions to ask when they're touring these facilities and making a decision on where to put their loved one.
And Jeannie, if I might just build on that for a minute, it's so important for people to do a little education ahead of time. Often these things come up sort of at a crisis level, but you can go to Nursing Home Compare on the web to find out about facilities, and that'll give you some ideas about how that facility rates. But I would say never just make a choice based on that. You should, as you're saying, Jeannie, go visit a facility. Don't make an appointment ahead of time, just go so that you can see how does this facility work on a sort of an ongoing basis. Do the residents look happy? Are the staff respectful? Are they smiling? Does the facility smell good? How does the food look? Those kinds of things that you can't tell on a website. Folks really need to go and check it out.
Absolutely. And, I'm so blessed to have this show because I get to educate and inform folks prior to the crisis occurring. And so for all of you still listening and hanging in there with us talking about the Ombudsman program, thank you so much for staying with us because this is so important to you, to your loved ones, for peace of mind, to be educated prior to the crisis. But when you are going in there, I love what you said. You don't make an appointment, just pop in because now that's their routine. They weren't expecting you, and that's what you see is what you're gonna get. What I often tell folks too, don't make a decision based on how pretty the walls are, because sometimes that's not the best decision to make for your loved one. You really have to get a feel for the people that are in the building and ask the right questions that are important and specific to your loved one that's going to be there. Like, do they have to get up every morning at the same time? And what if she doesn't want to get up? And she's not a big breakfast eater. She has a much better day if she sleeps in. I'm okay with that. And wait for the responses. If they're hesitant, mark that down and go to the next place and then make your judgment based on the top 3 that you like.
And if folks are feeling brave, they might even ask a few of the residents, just engage them a little bit. How do you like it here? How long have you lived here? What do you do? Sometimes people are flattered that you ask their opinion and they want to know about what your experience has been.
And oftentimes you can find folks sitting outside in the rocking chair and they just love to have visitors and love to chat. My sister was volunteering yesterday and she called bingo at a facility up in the mountains, and this little old lady said, "Will you come sit with me?" So they chatted and she told her about her day at the grocery store, and by the time she left she said, "Next time you come, you bring me one of those apple pies." So they're open, they're ready to chat, they love the visit. So that's a great way to have a window into how happy the residents are at the facilities. Love that. That's great. But back to you, Karen, because I did cut you off. We talked about communication. We talked about what your right is in terms of your routine and your care plan. What other rights are important that you've come across in your work over 17 years as a Georgia local Atlanta ombudsman?
Well, I think one of the things that people forget about is that people have the right to use the phone. And that's so important. It's sometimes they're only linked to the outside world, and the facility should make accommodations for everybody to be able to use the telephone. Now, you can't get on the phone and talk for 2 hours to somebody in Phoenix, but you've got to be able to allow people to be able to make that communication with their family and with their grandkids. And when the facility doesn't have that communication available, that's something that the ombudsman can take up for them if they want us to fight that battle. And usually that can be easily resolved. Sometimes the facility, if you're talking about a 200-bed facility, sometimes the phone goes out of whack and nobody bothers to tell the administrator. So sometimes it's just, a simple communication again, to make everybody's life much more enjoyable.
Now, on that note, people bring cell phones into facilities. Is that allowed?
Oh, yes.
Or are there facilities that say you can't, or that's a right too? You can bring a cell phone into that facility.
You should be able to bring in a cell phone.
I would feel
facility.
better if I'm placing a loved one to know that they had a cell phone in their drawer next to their bed. That would be one thing that I would think would be worth the monthly cost, in my opinion. But we all can't afford that. And if you cannot, the facility has a responsibility to make sure that you have a phone available to you to make phone calls.
Correct.
And to receive.
And to receive. And to get your mail on time in a timely way. Again, communication. The facility must make it available. I mean, the residents have the right to get mail and send mail, just like you and I would be able to. The facility should have stamps available if somebody wants to mail a card, and they should deliver the mail every day at around the same time, and the mail should not be opened.
Okay, important information, because you just don't know.
Yeah.
You feel like you're going into a whole different arena, but really, you're just changing your residence. I love what you said. Your rights, your constitutional rights, are still the same. So let's talk about how your program comes in again. You're a new resident. You've just been placed in a facility. The facility lets you all know who's new, or during your weekly or monthly or quarterly visits, you ask who are all the new folks in the facility?
That's exactly right. When the ombudsman makes his or her visit, they will get the list of new folks and try and visit as many of the new folks as possible. The Atlanta program tries to do a monthly visit to the nursing homes. So we feel like that those folks are probably the frailest and most vulnerable. So we try to do a monthly visit. So we'll get the list and, in no particular order, start a visitation.
Okay, so you all try to go monthly, but it's at least quarterly.
At least quarterly.
And for some other parts in Georgia that might be a little bit more spread out and harder to reach on a monthly basis, it may be quarterly. So you may have a loved one placed into a facility right after the ombudsman's been there, and it could be 3 months prior to the ombudsman coming out. But what you should know is that your loved one still has a right to that ombudsman program. It is a federally funded program under the Older Americans Act, and in the state of Georgia, it's also funded by the state.
Jeannie, and each facility has to have an ombudsman poster with the local and the state number on it. So use your right to use the phone if you need to call the ombudsman.
I see. Oh, and you can call the ombudsman right from the facility. Look at that. There you go. Good information. And so what I want to tell you is you don't have to wait till the ombudsman comes back out to the facility if you're having issues, because a lot of times I think those issues probably, I'm assuming here, come up when you first get into a facility because you're getting used to each other. Most often, no?
Well, it depends. It just, it's human nature. It just depends.
So don't wait. You have a right. You can make that phone call. The poster's right there on the wall. Your family can make that phone call for you as well. Do try to work with the staff. Don't just call the ombudsman right away. Try to have that communication first, I would imagine. But you do not have to wait, and then you all would reprioritize your visits based on the phone call that you might get, right?
Sure. And part of what the Ombudsman program does is help residents feel empowered to act on their own behalf. So when you're new, of course, you may not feel exactly empowered, but part of what the ombudsman are doing in those visits is helping you feel as a resident that I know what my rights are, I can talk with the facility, I can resolve this problem. But human nature, sometimes they just don't get resolved, and so that is a time when the ombudsman can step in. What we did want to also mention is that residents don't pay for the ombudsman services because we are funded through the government. The services are available. So you're not going to get a bill, the family's not going to get a bill, the facility's not going to get a bill.
Yeah, that's important for folks to know.
Right. And the ombudsman is an independent voice. So because we're funded by the government. We're not beholding to any organization or any provider or anybody really. I mean, and that's the purpose of the program, is to be that independent voice on behalf of the resident.
And knowledgeable about what your rights are and how facilities work and what some typical situations are. And so you can mediate that between the facility, the family, the patient, the resident, in a very effective manner. Now, back to the Ombudsman program. So what kind of training, we talked about the paid Ombudsman and also the volunteer Ombudsman. What kind of training would an Ombudsman go through?
Every state is different. In Georgia, for those who just want to volunteer and visit regularly, the local program would give some basic training about how to talk with folks, what to expect when you go into a facility, and what to do if a problem comes to that friendly visitor, because they would not be doing the problem solving. For staff ombudsmen and certified volunteers, we have a pretty rigorous training. It's 3 days of classroom training. It's 3 days of training on site, so 2 days in a skilled nursing facility, 1 day with personal care homes to really get a sense of how they work, who are the different folks at the facilities that you would interact with as an ombudsman and as a resident. And then there's time to be experiencing the work in the field. There's a written exam and an oral exam, so it's fairly rigorous training in Georgia. Some other states do it a little bit differently, so I can't say how they might do it in Louisiana or in Arizona,
so you have
for
to
example.
be certified.
But in order to resolve problems, you have to be certified.
But if someone wanted to volunteer, really they're just the eyes and ears of the certified ombudsman.
Exactly. So that's really the value of having the volunteer visitors. They are the eyes and ears, and so then they don't have to feel the pressure, oh gosh, I've got to figure out how to fix this. They just report it to the certified volunteer or to the staff ombudsman, who then take on the heavy lifting part of things.
And reprioritize your schedule based on what those volunteers are telling you.
Right,
I see.
right.
Okay. So how many facilities is an ombudsman typically appointed to? It
Karen,
probably
do you
differs
have a
by
sense?
county. Huh?
Well, it varies across the country. In the Atlanta area, there are between 9 and 11 nursing facilities per staff person, and about 75 or more personal care homes per staff person.
Wow.
That's why the volunteers are so very, very important.
And needed.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so we talked about the importance of receiving mail unopened and being able to send mail, how communication is so important. And back to the volunteer ombudsman, they can still try to communicate issues with the facility staff, but then if it's not resolved, they bring it to the next level, or do they not even do that?
Really, for the volunteers, they should bring it to the staff.
Okay.
So, unless it's something minor, for example, if a resident, as the volunteer is visiting, that resident says, they just never bring my water pitcher close enough to me. If the staff person from the facilities in the room, the volunteer visitor could say, could you bring that pitcher closer? But generally speaking, wouldn't you agree, Karen, the volunteer visitors would bring it back to the staff?
Yes, that just seems an easy fix for a simple problem. That could be a major problem. If you can't get your water pitcher, you can't get your water, and water for older folks is very important.
Absolutely, especially
easy
this time
fix.
of year.
Yes.
Should we, and then visitors. Can visitors come and go as they please anywhere the resident is? Can we talk about that? Because some people don't know, because the hospitals tell you got to leave at a certain time, so they may expect that.
Again, what we talked about earlier, you're just changing your residence from home, from one living situation to another living situation. People have the right to receive visitors. Now, facilities also have to protect everybody. I don't think we mentioned that the facility has the administrator of that facility has the huge responsibility of protecting everybody. So it could be in the evening they're going to close lock the front door, but the facility also should make arrangements for those folks who work and want to come in the evening to visit with their loved ones, that, strangely enough, is usually not a problem, because I think the facilities understand that. So if your loved one, if you work and you need to come after hours, make the arrangements. Talk to the administrator about it. They're usually very amenable to that.
And these days, my goodness, most people are working, so
Yes.
after hours would be very busy.
Yes.
So there again, it does get back somewhat to communication. So facilities might have some ways of ordinarily doing things, like Karen was saying. Maybe they routinely lock the door at 10 o'clock or whatever. But it does seem to me that often it's just a communication issue. So if you needed to come later, you just make those arrangements. If there's a problem, the ombudsman is there to help, there again, facilitate that conversation. If a resident says, my son, he works second shift, or whatever the shift is, so he can't come until after 11. And the facility just, isn't helpful. Well, the ombudsman there would go in and advocate on behalf of that resident to see what they could work out with the facility so that the son could come at midnight or whatever time, because he, gets off the shift so
And
late.
even here, we're talking about facility and son. But on the flip side, too, you are always advocating for the resident. So it may be that the resident says, my son keeps coming at midnight. I don't want a visitor that late. Keep him out. You're going to facilitate communication between the resident and their family.
Well, and the facility, too.
And the facility.
So we might be backing up the facility to say, the resident has said, so we would say this to the family member, the resident has said they don't want to be up that late, so we're advocating on behalf of the resident. What can we do to facilitate your visit at a different time?
Now, this is probably a bit of a sticky conversation, but we have had some personal care homes in the news lately here in Georgia. And I think it was just last week I heard of another one where a patient's medicine was not getting to the patient. And so, of course, the minute that is occurring, you need to call your ombudsman, and I would imagine that would be your priority number one, and your whole schedule would be reworked.
Complaints are the number one priority for ombudsmen. So if, for example, Karen had been out to a facility yesterday and done a routine visit and everything was fine, but this morning, she gets a call, there's a problem, she would go back, because complaints really are the number one priority for the ombudsman program. Now, depending on the severity of the complaint, we do have standards of promptness. So if Karen got a complaint today from a resident who said, my food is cold, she's probably not going to drop everything and go out to that facility today if she's working on a different complaint or something else. But if the allegation were, gosh, the worker is abusing me and I'm fearful, the ombudsman would drop everything and go out and try and figure out what's going on with that complaint and work to resolve it to the resident's satisfaction.
How about some things to keep family members aware of, or what some red flags or signs may be that even if someone's just a little bit rough with their loved one, what do you talk to families about to keep their eyes and ears open? Because they're there more than the ombudsman as well.
I would say if you're visiting with your family member and there's a change in the way they're communicating with you, all of a sudden they stop talking about a particular staff person, or shift their eyes, or say, I don't want to talk about it, that is a red flag. What's going on there? There have been cases where staff people have been verbally abusive or physically abusive, and the resident is reluctant to tell. The family member can call the ombudsman and say, I don't know what's going on, but something has changed in my loved one's behavior. Can you go and talk to them? Or can you just keep your eye on them? And we will do that. And if the resident says to me, I don't want to talk about it, that is a red flag. But am I going to say, okay, she said it's okay. I mean, everything's okay. No, that says to me things maybe not be okay. So I'm just going to be extra diligent in my monthly visit and make sure that I go back the next month. Make sure that he or she has my card with my phone number on it, and I will reiterate that.
And understands their
Yeah.
rights so that you
Yes.
can empower them to help themselves as well.
Yes.
And we all do, if we are cognitive and
Yes.
fortunate enough to be cognitive, have a responsibility to advocate for ourselves, as hard as that is. But the Ombudsman will help you because it's an objective person advocating on your behalf
That's
with
correct.
you. Thank you so much, Melanie and Karen, for being with us today. Important topic, important information to share about rights. And I encourage you all, if you're in Georgia, to go to www.georgiaombudsman.org to get more information about the Ombudsman program, even if you're not in Georgia, and to find your local ombudsman in your state if necessary. And it is necessary. So thank you for coming and being with me today. We've shared some very important information to our communities.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jeannie. It was our pleasure.
I'm Jeannie Pete. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day and week ahead, and listen here same time next week and every week. Homestead Hope Foundation is your resource for a healthy life. God bless.